Sure. I would like to.
Let me know whenever it's ready.
Good.
Good? Yeah, it's your email. That was not my. Oh, it said it's sending.
I also have my gun, yes.
Yeah, it says it's sending. I think it's starting. It just says like sending and there's like a blank loading bar. I'll try this different way. Yeah, the Wi-Fi is just not working. Are you, Wi-Fi work for you guys?
Yeah.
Let me see, I can try it. Now it seems to be. Try resending it.
First, agency by its very nature is inescapable. For 09, agency closely operation reflective assessment. The agents continue to operate. Agency assessing quality is justified in her engagement. Agency one can be agent home will determine agency justified. Agency closing himself only represents company nature of agency relevant. Things are true that are these are things that are true dependent world and such your operator. For example, we consider world which have blue here, but you can't consider world neutral triangle does have three sides and it's topology true. And operator truth has applied to all agencies. There's no operator distinction between agents until that truth is universal. And the requirement of prescriptive laws that when we reflect upon one's ends, otherwise one's action be determined by causal influences. Likewise, defend yourself to cause your actions. That's for agency. Course 99 to conceive yourself to cause your action. Identify the choice in which actions you have the desire to do A and B, but then your paddle you choose A. You run the choice. You're the only terms. You run the choice in the force and child with your A, but then our cause of your action. Agency line requires a clear principle on which you choose to act. And agency is your ability to act as an agent. However, absolutely freely lacking. So becoming tool that lacks power to pursue. And this is the most basic form of agency. You no longer exert your own ability to pursue, but rather a mere mechanism for someone else's agency. The stated as your fails for instance to will and act. Or 09. Competence is a nature system as a pure system of private rights. For the state of nature is morally incoherent. First, the postulate correct reason with regard to rights is that acquired rights are morally necessary. Extension for freedom, but it's impossible to acquire right in the state of nature. Second, rights are necessarily enforceable. Acquired rights can't be enforced in the state of nature. Third, private rights can only be discerned when the court sustains that non-unilateral actions of parties that subject to extent can be established in the state of nature. And we saw this in the use of the all public institutions stripping too. The remedy institutions have the power that private citizens lack. Thus, is the voice of people. They rule themselves. The people are represented by the sovereign, which means that they can only speak and act through their institutions. The all-knowing world is consented to by all rational agents. Agents can try to reject or use some other metric. However, they just be objectively wrong, or is it possible for any one agency for their own freedom since it can control the action of others rather than if the will for the security of everyone else's freedom, along with everyone else. Only government institutions capable of meeting the conditions for a general since extend itself such as capable of maintaining everyone's freedom. Also means that my firm principle for other normal claims only my firm can be binding into SH agents will certain things to be an action to be an agent at all. And most people must be able to set ends for themselves to remain free and independent of the will of others and thus be their own agent. Ripsy 3. A system of equal freedom is one in which each person is free to use their powers to set her own purpose. Your right to freedom, protection, capacity to choose ends. You remain independent if nobody tells you what purposes of pursue independence, not a special case of a more general interest in being able to set and pursue your purpose. Underlying the difference of these constitutions, such as the rights to institutional instruments that can constrain the conduct of others in order to protect things that matter apart from them. Thus, the same as creating a system of equal and outer freedom prefer independently. First point is that the ability to rational will and this corrects that any moral theory allows you to use moral actions here without the codes in the first place. Conceptual theories like util, because my ability to pursue pleasures and production to achieving pleasure. 2. Only universal law can give us reason to act that until respecting freedom. Of course, 06. Any reason to say science also I can take a report to me. I can build this object from this possibility. You see the opportunity. My 100% provide a reason for some my universal yields public reasons. Impact how intent comes out for sometimes because the intent determines the action for sometimes are irrelevant. Course 14. Suppose you're starting out to be the same. Suppose an impact by spouse called making movements out of her giving my sandwich. No one this is any more without an act. So in some intention kind of an act at all times be giving my sandwich after at least intended training the sandwich in my possession yours. And intention. I advocate that the United States federal government ought to guarantee the right to housing by enforcing bans on the practice of redlining or the use of the influence based upon race predator lending retail redlining. The current housing regulations to protect against discrimination aren't being enforced. 06 fair housing gives each of the only 30 days across the plan. Having enforcement power people facing discrimination the housing market were required to file a suit within 180 days. In 1960, the law provided thousands of complaints that housing discrimination here. These complaints were founded because of the opportunities to resist and refuse to open the act itself. No, most experts estimate that more than 2 million cases of housing discrimination per each year without legal action being taken. Redlining is based upon expectation of differential status that creates a racial hierarchy. Codes 14 whites could rely on legitimate criticism backed by the government. Blacks were permitted until lenders who took them for money. Where housing attorneys made money by swinging frustrated hopes of black migrants. 85% of them were used by the Chicago bond contract. That uses people as a means to earn. Black people were still are exploited as housing attorneys to create a profit. That creates a system of dependency in which people are unable to live for themselves without being dictated by the will of white property owners. 4. For reasons to preserve independence, for reasons reflecting political society, the public power is justified by the requirement of equal freedom. The purpose of political use to make sure that the requirements of rights apply systematically. If workers accept unsafe work conditions because they're the only terms which can survive in the state can regulate those conditions. Power resides in attacking each other. Each citizen can share in the general will. And this practice of degradation that creates a different neighborhoods with differential status. That's codes 2. Chicago is one of the most segregated cities in the country. The Federal Housing Administration insisted that restricting covenants which held barblacks from receiving federal black home loans. The Chicago led the nation's use of restricted covenants altogether was harnessed in denying black people enjoyed by white Americans. To clarify, this system that's due to structural law that creates differential status prevents us from the system equal out of freedom. People are arbitrary limit no other choices. That creates a system dependency. Black people are unable or segregated and denied access to resources in society. Badger 15. Redlining great control of neighborhoods. This practice was adopted by part of banks in the area of Massachusetts, which attention to redlining communities cut it off from essential capital. It still exists in bank tactics that have targeted the same neighborhoods with predatory lending and retail redlining. Underview. The redlining and housing discrimination direct from equal access housing, national law and center homelessness and poverty. 15. Even when applicants were access housing, they face discrimination. The CERD called the U.S. on to ensure affordable housing affordable and adequate housing for all by undertaking the investigation of discriminatory practices by redlining. A most consistently enforced aspect of the right to housing is the aspect of being free from discrimination. Smith 08. A common criticism of the right to adequate housing is that the states are unable to provide housing to all. One of the most enforced aspects of the right is that the prohibition of discrimination access to housing nations that protecting its right to housing. The ICSCR must do so non-discriminatory by protecting its determination access to housing. Several international decisions reflect the justability of the right to non-discrimination access to adequate housing. The right to housing is a negative right. Rise 05. The right to housing doesn't mean that governments are supposed to construct houses. Rather, it's considered the obligation for the state not to act away the underlying the opportunity of houses to gain access to housing. Under view 2, first, 1 area 3 is the reason drop 3. The negative notes have not used so they can discover drop enough times to use the 1 area. Second point, the advocates RBIs 8 times the means of tries to time to make the arguments RBIs recognize viewpoints to area. Even for enemy pops the highest score. What is if it would every single layer in just 3 minutes? C. Aspects and dark news inhibitor cells like violate absent RBIs and just and bidirectional theory. D. Only neg has to ground only access theory RBIs. Clear rest process opportunity. 3. No 2 RBIs. 8. Create distraction people determining reading 3. Largely based on RBIs. So 2 RBIs screw with the 1 area viewpoints. 2 RBIs screw with the 2 area force. The 2 area over theory or the RBI regardless 1 area strat. C is most circle armor RBIs in my first speech, so they should too.
You read everything?
Yeah.
Are you ready? Yeah. Does legislation exist in the status quo that bans redlining?
So the looks at 06 evidence would indicate that people are not being like mediated with like or not being treated when they file things like complaints against things like housing.
So the legislation exists according to this evidence. Then what does the act do?
We say that the United States ought to guarantee the right to housing by enforcing the bans.
Yeah, but if it's already banned, what do you change?
Enforcing it?
Wait. Are you saying that it's not enforced in the statutes? Wait. How can you do you fiat solvency that it will be enforced? Because it seems to me like the legislation.
I don't think the app is like contingent on like solvency and like the consequences that you're talking about. I just show that we have to guarantee a right to housing, right? I say that redlining prevents that. We should ban
redlining. Do you pass any legislation?
We pass any legislation. I defend what the advocacy says, which says that
so you enforce existing legislation. Do you fiat that is enforced? Because
I don't think it's like a question of fiat, just a question of like because I think you're getting caught up in like the question of like solvency from like this consequential surrounds, right? Like, that's
no, I understand it might not link to your framework. This is just a question of what your advocacy is. Do you fiat that it will be enforced?
Do you want me to?
It's just a question. I don't understand what your advocacy is.
My advocacy explicitly says that they will enforce housing bans on the practice of redlining. Right? Okay. That's what it explicitly says. If you have a problem with that, feel free to.
So what links to like system of equal and outer freedom?
Things that would deny people's freedom.
Like as in consequences?
What do you mean as in consequences?
As in if I say that like banning redlining leads to more people being oppressed, would that mean?
You'd have to show why it is like intrinsic to the act of redlining itself.
Okay, right? How can I contest when it's insolvency?
How can you contest one? What do you mean? So again, it's not a question of solvency, it's a question of like what redlining is and whether that would affirm it again.
So how do I disprove
you could show things like why it is intrinsic to redlining such that it would deny a system of equal
as in, like, intrinsic to banning redlining would violate a system of equal and outer freedom?
Like you just show like why redlining would better like have when we have a world in which we have things like redlining we'd better have a system of equal and outer freedom, right? That's what it turns.
Okay, how do I prove that intrinsically?
What do you mean prove that?
Like
if I say redlining, you have to show that is what like redlining is, right? So for example,
so like a definition of redlining?
Yeah.
Okay, but what if the definition is like redlining is bad?
That's not a definition. That's a normative claim. So wait, what?
How do negatives get offense in your framework if the ground?
I just explained it to you, right? It's not that the round's decided by a definition. That can be a contestable what redlining is. That's just a different layer of the debate, right? You don't have to contest that. You can if you want, right? But there's nothing like that necessitates you to do that.
Okay. Why do intended harms outweigh foreseen harms, and how can we determine a definition? Or like,
first, so two different questions.
Yeah, first question.
First question. So, how do we, or why, or how?
Why?
Why? So yeah, my reason is that the intent determines the action. So, for example, course guide 14 gives an example between giving someone a sandwich and having a series of spasms that cause me to like move my hand such that like it would look like I gave you a sandwich. The second one, no one would say that's normatively good, right? It's just a series of events that so happens to be, right? But giving you a sandwich, the intention to give you a sandwich is what makes it normatively good to like share something, right?
redlining leads to ghettos. Is your argument? Do you make that argument?
What?
Does redlining lead to ghettos?
It reinforces like ghettoization.
Okay, well, I'll quote from the YC, this practice has led to ghettoization. Will you defend that statement?
What do you mean defend that statement? It's an argument, not an advocacy.
Will you defend the argument?
Defend the argument. I'm not going to go for every part of the app. But
Stop right for Let me know you got it.
anyone else?
Yours 3 up case. You might skip an off. Is everyone ready? Yeah. is the interpretation the affirmative may not advocate that the United States federal government ought to guarantee the right to housing by enforcing bans on the practice of redlining violation. That's part of their plain text standards. One, cross-text proves that the app is non-inherent, in which case this app is a truism. They contend that something that already happened, they can defend that, which means that they can say that, for example, that we want to ban slavery, and that therefore they can defend the intent behind it, which screws the negative because obviously it is bad. But the app doesn't change anything existing within the status quo, which means that I can't get links to a shift in the status quo. All of this has rely upon the change in the status quo, which means there's no uniqueness for any negative offense. All they do is fiat enforcement, which guarantees solvency. If legislation exists now and isn't enforced, then the UNAC doing it wouldn't do anything, wouldn't change that, which means that they necessarily fiat that Cobbs and everyone else upholds the legislation that already exists, which is multi-actor fiat and unreasonable because it means they get object fiat, that like poverty, essentially they can be like, poverty exists now, we fiat that poverty goes away, we fiat that enforcement necessarily works, which is bad because it means we cannot contest UNAC solvency, which is key to real world education, because if we cannot determine whether or not claims are true, then we will never have comparative analysis. Also, second is limits. The 1AC is a removal of restriction, not the establishment of a right. That explodes potential acts by allowing any app that does anything to prevent the minimization of housing access, but not directly increase housing access, like an app that bans eminent domain, or an app that removes tariffs on the trade of housing materials, or an app that bans redlining, or anything that tangentially relates to preventing a decrease in housing. Anything can, in effect, prevent decreased housing access, but that means that it explodes limits. It's not predictable app offense, nor is it grounded in the right to housing topic literature, even if it is a negative right, which is bad because it sets up unreasonable research burden. Insurance class shares 13. Limits face real consequences that could put together a strategy against any random argument, but there are only so many nice stable electively catch or go to movie rule that are infinite for says this community doesn't care whether participants have life or spend time with their family. Limits are real impact because they feel impact every day. Third is ground. Defending an app that not just bans redlining but also guarantees the right to housing for people, solves all of their counter-interpretation, and has net benefits because I get links to disad like increased public housing racism, disad Section 8, disad state overcharge, disad just right to housing bad arguments in general, etc. It's not possible if they just amend one policy and they're not even amending it because it already exists. Literally my only ground is banning red redlining is good, which is obviously not offense to the framework, given that I cannot even contest the implementation of the 1AC, just the intent behind it. If redlining is defined as discrimination, then negative will never win. Not guaranteeing housing means none of our links are stable as well, since there might not even be an increase in home. This limits quality and quantity of net ground, reduces clash-only education, you debate, prioritize knowledge production over consumption. She's a question of form, not content. Fourth, it's impossible to debate under because we can't debate about enforcement, only passing the legislation, i.e. we won't know what cops do in their individual decisions, whether or not they will enforce legislation, which means the 1AC does not provide a productive discussion. Now, fairness is voted about, that's the better rating, which is the possible value of one debater structural advantage. Use competing terms. A, I don't know what you think is reasonable. B, reasonably forced to raise the bottom word debaters, just keep on being reasonable. C, competing terms is good for debate since it establishes norms and precedent. Shock debater. A times Q with me disadvantage substance. B sets present debaters can run for arguments. C, dropping them, and their advocates are functionally the same thing. Next up. The 1AC sequesters non-human species from their anthropocentric frame of reference in two key ways, are just one key way. Home development destroys critical forest habitat and decreases biodiversity. Sign at all 07. Forest for critical habitat, increasing development can have many implications. Species may disappear. Decline in loss of habitat is highly associated with at-risk species. Present obstacle of recovery. Declines in biodiversity, various movement, and increase in predation. Habitat degradation can also decline fish numbers. Skip the next one. And anthro is the biggest impact. Skip the tag. Oliver 10. Global warming, species extinction, shrinking biodiversity, endless war, military expanded, short record wealth, the few poverty, the rest, and more than ever we need ethics alone rather than dominion over the knowledge of dependence. All living creatures belong to the inhabitants of a shared planet. Generosity is a virtue that we cannot afford to live without. This does not require having much in common besides living together in the same code. This proves that the 1AC's act of banning redlining necessarily increases homes, which we say has the intention of reproducing anthropocentric violence against non-human animals, which necessarily is a violation of a system of equal and outer freedom and outweighs because there's more animals that are being affected than just the 1AC plan. Now, next off, there's no act of mission distinction. One, if a baby's drowning and a person chooses to let the baby drown, then that person would be morally culpable for the baby's death. Otherwise, it's impossible to differentiate between acts and omission, since an act is merely the omission of an omission. Second, if you know something's going to happen and you willingly disregard it, then your intention is to allow it to happen. And only naturalism is epistemically accessible. Skip the other stuff. Pavana 11. Non-naturalist morality faces difficulties. Knowledge is mediated by physical processes. Moral facts cannot influence the physical world, and it's hard to see how we can acknowledge of them. The implication of this argument is it takes out intent and mean-based frameworks because we can only ever know what exists now. I cannot know what the intention behind something is, and just because you claim a definition exists does not mean that that thing is related to that definition. For example, I could say slavery is good because it makes the world a better place, but insofar as you're the one that is defining it, then it will inherently further your side. The only way we can determine the intention behind something is by looking at the hypothetical consequences as a result. The standard is combating structural oppression because ethics mandates accurate representation. That's prerequisite to evaluating omnilateral world because ontology determines who counts in the first place and can only be achieved through minimizing structural violence. Bill number 9. We ask normal questions if we now have a best represent subjects. We cannot possibly answer when consider the ontology subject to representation of the issue. We cannot ask the answer fill in differential power that distinguishes between those who be eligible for recognition and those who will not. Case. Hold them to winning solvency as a result of the policy of doing something as a prerequisite to garnering offense from the framework. Otherwise, the app always wins because they can define what redlining is. It's a voting issue for fairness because we get no offense under their framework. They say a priori truth, but you can only derive a priori truth as a result of our experiences in the world. Their example is a triangle, but I only know a triangle exists because I've seen one in real life, which proves a posteriori truths are necessary to determine a priori truths. I will concede that agency and freedom are necessary, but you say that people must be able to set ends for themselves to remain free. But this appeals to the concept of consequences, i.e., that they have the conditions for being able to set them themselves, and also assumes that everyone wants to be independent of everyone else, which is a totalizing claim and necessarily is false as a result of our oppression framework. You say we should create a system of equal and outer freedom, but insofar as the world of the app has hypothetical violations of freedom or does nothing, no agent would logically believe it should be universalized, which means if we read a dis side to the case, it applies. Redlining is legal in status quo. Passing new legislation wouldn't do anything. Stat 14. Redlining for financial institution making it possible for residents to borrow money, mortgage insurance, or other financial services. Community reinvestment act, but an end to all redlining practices. Courts have determined that redlining is legal when institutions use race as bias, and a right to housing laws lead to violence and exclusion. If this doesn't link to the app, then it proves nothing does. UHCHR 09. Women face discrimination inherent seriously affect the right to housing. Violence common women property can be forcibly seized as an attempt that involves long-lasting trauma. If women decide to fight her inheritance, she may face violence from her in-laws, raping community that results in social exclusion. And courts won't defend the plan. NYCB 16. Constitution does not include right to housing. Lindsay B. Norman, Supreme Court, the Constitution provides no guarantee of access to dwelling, and courts are key to your solvency. Empirics old 10. Proponents housing applications denied. The courts overturn the decision without the courts. Proponent would have nowhere to turn for offense. Perverse to work the right housing. Government practice did not reflect the ideal judicial action was necessary to make things right reality. This also means the 1AC makes people dependent on courts, which turns their dependency impacts. Also, they say intended harms outweigh foreseen, but you can't determine what is intended without examining what is foreseen, i.e. hypothetical consequences. You say current regulations are not being enforced. If they can use this to prove uniqueness, then I can prove it to use it to prove no. They're saying it's not being enforced now, but if they can use it to prove uniqueness, it means I can use it to prove no absolvency. Otherwise, it's a form of contradiction. You say that redlining means that they won't get property, but the 1AC, the 1AC does not guarantee a right to housing. Their card says that it leads to ghettos, which means they have houses, it's just in a different place. So they do not. It functionally does nothing different, which means they don't get solvency either. Yeah.
First, can you reset the document?
Yeah. Okay, so. My internet's kind of slow, so it might take 15 seconds. You want to just start processing once you get it.
First, before we start, I can walk.
Or download.
Yeah, did you read everything on the documentation?
Yeah. Well, wait, actually, no, there was one.
You read the whole voter section.
Not the no RBI stuff. Everything else, yes. I included no RBI stuff in the document sign, but I didn't.
Okay, so let's talk about the teacher. So explain to me the limits argument. It just seems to be an argument for why negative rights are bad. Why is that a reason why?
Well, we say that it's not a negative right in that you do not say that the government should not have discrimination in any way, shape, or form. You just remove one existing piece of legislation. You do not provide an overarching plan to prevent future legislation, for example. Furthermore, we say that even if it was a negative right, it still explodes potential affirmatives because it means that any act
even if
that
it wasn't
in
negative
effect,
right? Your argument is just that it explodes limits because anything that makes it easier for people to get a house or something like that.
yeah. So argument is even if it's a negative right, that still explodes limits because any act that in effect allows people to get increased access to housing necessarily affirms under your paradigm of debate.
But isn't
Which
that
would be
also true for positive rights? For example, I could give someone bread. That way they don't have to spend money on food. They can better afford a house. That's a positive right that has made it easier for them to get a house.
Yeah, we say that is also affects topical in the same way you are.
It affects topical.
Yeah, in effect, that's what that's our
I just think that the United States has an obligation to do that. Why does that mean affects topical? I thought I made this clear in CX.
Wait, what?
I just said that the United States has an obligation to guarantee a right to housing,
I'm not contesting 1AC solvency or ethics in the T-shell. We're saying that that's a bad model for debate because it allows thousands of affirmatives.
I even explicitly was if you have a problem with this, I can change it for you. And
wait,
you're
what?
don't you
gonna
purposely
change your
avoided the question. You were
what question?
you were do you fiat enforcement? I was do you want me to? And you're I don't know.
Wait, that is unrelated.
Clearly, you know if you're at a
It's
T-shell.
unrelated to the limits argument. We say that
okay,
you were a
sure, then
liberal
let's
or
not
a
talk about the
Christian,
limits
not
argument.
a
Let's talk about the violation of the shell as full. Why couldn't you just be I don't want you to do this?
Okay,
even
the
when it was
violation
explicit there
is
and
that
you chose
you
to go.
defended the plan text.
I'm not disputing that. I'm not disputing that. I'm just asking if it was literally just right there for you to say I don't want you to defend the enforcement of it. Why would why not?
I mean, our argument is you defending the enforcement. Are you fiating the enforcement of it is bad. So
Okay, clearly that's non-responsive. Let's talk about the argument about non-unique disads. So why can't that seems to assume that you have to defend the status quo? Why can't the neg just defend the deviation from the status quo in which redlining is not banned?
So what's the dissent to the app? Yes, I can.
The net benefit to the counterplan? But I don't know.
It wouldn't be a dissent to the app. It wouldn't be competitive either.
But why would it not be competitive? If the
only competitive
it
app
seems to
is
start from the
the one
premise
you see
that the
is
neg
redlining
has to
good.
defend the status quo, and anything that is the quo is neg ground. Why does the neg have to defend the quo?
The 1AC does not change the quo. Even if I
Yeah, why does that matter? Why
different
can't I
from
defend the
quo.
quo? What is so inherently wrong with defending the quo?
It means there's no links to any dissents.
Yeah,
there's
that just means that
the 1AC literally already exists.
just read a dissent
Can
that
I
would
say
be
it's not
just read a
90?
net benefit to a counterplan, or just read reasons why banning redlining is bad and why it would be better if we didn't have it. That would be a dissent. It just flipped around.
Are you asking a question?
there an alt to the K?
It's a decide.
We're just going to be tuning off under V with the AC cube.
Tune you off under the AC.
Just let me know whenever you're ready. There's a few typos in the interiors, but I can fix them afterwards. Put it down. It wouldn't be that big of a deal. Actually, let's just start on the interview. And then we'll go to the two shows. So we're good.
Sorry, on the IMDb.
Yeah. The second one. They've conceded one of your theories legit reason to drop the debater. They've also conceded that the app gets RBIs. I mean, this debate never comes down to substance because the only place they can vote negatives on, because I get an RBI on the two shows, if they beat back the theories, which means that this debate never goes down to substance. They've also conceded no 2 and RBI, so if they made an argument for why they get RBI, which means all shells in the 1 are no risk because they don't get an RBI because they have not warranted why they get an RBI and the 2 are too late. So that means this debate's never going to come down to substance. Let's go to the shells. Or actually, I guess we'll some specific warrant for RBIs. Like 77 times means twice to make the arguments, which means I should get an RBI and also it's reciprocal to warrant them in the 2 and R because I warrant RBIs in microspeed division too. Let's go to the 1 R show. First, A's interpretation of negative reads a standard of combating structural oppression. They must define what structural oppression is and how we combat it. These evaluation. They say we should combat structural oppression, but they don't take a stance on what that is or what it even tells us what constitutes oppression in the first place. The refer my interpretation. So I think they're saying things like structural oppression is a loaded term. I don't know what it means to say things like structural oppression. For example, you can evaluate for example, some people might think like affirmative action structural oppression or something like that, which means I don't know how to implicate arguments in terms of that. Which means I'm not saying that it is structural oppression, but my argument is I don't know how to delineate between that and what it affects. Which means that you don't delineate. That means that it becomes impossible to weighing up these. Also always any other potential views because it means I can't even win offense at this point because I can't interact with their offense. Now, second interp. A's interpretation, negative rating was having affect section on the one and CV simulation. They don't have an affect section in the speech talk anyway, which means I don't know what to defend. See, for my interpretation, that means a lot of like, what to use strategy because I don't know what they defend in the first place, especially when they make arguments like the app is inherent or I don't defend the right to housing. That means that they can just get up and go, oh, the right to housing is a positive right, and I also defend banning discrimination, which isn't negative right, so it's negative ground. They can do things like that because I don't know what they advocate for in the first place, which is also really shifty. It also screws over one area because whatever I do, because for example, if I treat it like they do, if I treat like they do have it, like they do have access after, then obviously that, because whether they have access after affects my one area strategy, which means they do see whatever the one area doesn't, which means screws over the one area. But in fairness, balance and debating fairness of the important debating issues competing interests, which means access tackling reasonable having broad just means it collapses competing interests. Now let's go to Ursula. Counter-interpretation, the app may argue that the USFG enforces the ban on redlining if they explicitly offer in CX a change. I went out of my way to offer to change my interpretation to CX. That solves that literally solves all of the abuse because then they just chose to shy away from the question. Now, additionally, here's some options for my interpretation. First point is that my interpretation solves all. Is key to actually being able to create inherency. You can see the arguments in the first overview that the right to housing is defined as ending housing discrimination, which means that my interpretation, which means that the ending redlining is the only topical interpretation of this topic that takes up the argument about how things like positive negative rights. How do we think about that issue? Because they have conceded that the right to housing is defined as ending things like housing discrimination, which means that it necessarily comes first. They also say they can't get access to this around. However, obviously that doesn't make sense. That just assumes that the neg has to defend the status quo and the app has to defend the shift from the status quo. That's nothing but a dogmatic assumption that for whatever reason people just take for granted. You have not warranted why you have to defend the status quo. You can just read a counterplan that deviates for the app. You don't even have to read a counterplan. You just say it would be a better world in which we have, in which we offer redlining, which means it solves all of your needs. Also, it's multi-actor fiat. No, it doesn't. You didn't ask me how the USFG enforces the ban. I'll specify for you now. The USFG enforces the ban by telling courts that by telling the local judicials that they will be fined if they don't enforce it. That's one actor doing one thing that fines other people for not enforcing the ban, which means that it would solve all of your offense. Which means that solves your offense. It also means that you can. That also means that you get access to all of your disheads. It also means that you get access to all of your disheads. Because it also means that it would be inherent. Because that's obviously not happening right now. That also takes out their limits argument because they say that anything can be negative right. However, first one, however, same thing applies to things like positive rights. For example, if I give you a piece of bread, that is a positive right. That also increases your right to housing. I.e., you have bread, which means you don't have to spend money on bread, which means you can spend more money on housing. That makes it more accessible for you to have housing. That sounds absurd, but that's exactly what their argument is. That also takes out their limit argument. That also takes out the argument that they have to argue for a line of good and libertarianism. Additionally, you should prefer my interpretation. It also takes out the argument you can't debate my interpretation. Now, you should additionally prefer my one-area shell. 13 times that they concede means that if they're even ahead on their shell, that's only because they had to spend too much time reading things, other things in the one area, which means that it's a question of whether you evaluate that shell in the first place.
45. Is it 45?
The order is going to be my shell and the two shells that we read. Oh, starting on the case real quick.
On the other view,
Yeah. Is everyone ready? Cool. The start of the 1 AR immediately kicks substance and proves our abuse offense. The second we call you out on it, you have to read frivolous theory shells that obviously have no implication to education and fairness. You did no impact weighing, nor did you do any implication as to which shell comes before another. I'll do that now. Go to the T shell. This shell comes first. I'll do the weighing. First of all, this debate is a question of whose model debate is better. Their model allows for non-inherent acts. Ask to defend things that already exist. That logic justifies ask to defend bans on slavery. Ask to defend bans on discrimination. Guess what? Ask to defend ban on redlining. We say the topic should not give you this type of ground for several several reasons. First, it explodes limits. If you get access to any non-inherent app, that means thousands of existing pieces of legislation become app-bound. It also means that any app that in some effect allows for minimizing reduction in housing are topical, like banning eminent domain or giving people money. The 1AC does not guarantee housing. They just prevent one form of discrimination. It's a voting issue for limits, because if they can prevent thousands of existing pieces of legislation, then that necessarily overspreads the research burdens for the negative, and means that we do not spend time with our families. We do not spend time outside the debate community. We sell our soul to debate, where we are spending every single night preparing against affirmatives that we may or may not hate. Limits as a voter because we feel the impact every day. Second is ground. We get no disads because they're all non-unique. Literally, you change nothing from the quo. Yes, you may be right, I can read a counterplan, but it wouldn't be competitive. Also, without disads, there's no net benefit. Yes, I might be able to read a counterplan, but you haven't identified what disad I could read. This means you limit quantity of ground to just counterplans. Furthermore, this is terrible quality of ground because the only competitive advocacy with the 1AC is redlining good counterplans, which obviously is not viable offense. This is the biggest link to fairness because clash is the only the only viable route to the ballot in terms of substance debate. It is also the greatest link to education because you conceded that if you defend something that already exists in the quo, then you do not gain advocacy skills, which is necessary to solve existing problems outside of the round, which definitely outweighs their links to fairness because this abuse happened in this round, whereas theirs is completely theoretical. Let's go to the first argument. Counterinterpretation. If the negative reads the standard of combating structural oppression, they do not have to define what structural oppression is and how we combat it. Here's the problem with this interpretation. Combating structural, words are all vague. We cannot define every single word ever to exist, but insofar as Butler clarifies what kind of structural oppression is, i.e. defining it as ontology of exclusion of voices, it necessarily means their offense. Also, you can do the work yourself, link offense back to the standard, especially proven that your standard is equally, if not more confusing. Cross-examination is very unclear as to what a system of equal and outer freedom is. Insofar as you don't define it, the potential abuse goes both ways. Also, asking cross-examination solves. You didn't even care. Also, proven by the fact that you were not even going for substance anyways, proves that this was not a voting issue. It's just a potential abuse argument. Also, I could not exclude arbitrary offense by just redefining or shifting the advocacy. Judge check solves because structural oppression is very easily defined. Yes, someone might say affirmative action is structural oppression, but obviously you can make an argument to respond to that as to why it is structural oppression. Just use your persuasion skills, Richard. Also, let's see. Oh, they also said that I can. Oh wait, no, this is also they didn't impact this to education or fairness. Like you might lose some ground, but not compared to the I lost all ground. The anthrocade didn't even like. Let's go to the second shelf. Counterinterpretation. The negative does not have to have an explicit advocacy text in the 1NC if the 1AC is not inherent. Okay, if your app is not inherent, like I don't even know what to defend. Honestly, a counterplan, but it really wouldn't impact anyway because the 1AC or whatever. I'll just answer the arguments. They say that they don't know what my advocacy is, but it's very clear if the 1NC does not read an advocacy text that we default to the status quo, you can assume that, or you can ask them cross-examination solves your offense. Would have taken 5 seconds. Furthermore, the fact that you were sketching cross-examinations of what you defend means that it probably links to you harder. The fact that you shifted your advocacy in the 1ER by saying that like you defend giving like judicial actions and fines and stuff like that proves that you definitely link to this harder than I do, and that your advocacy text is whatever. Okay, there we go. They say that if I don't have explicit advocacy text, I can shift to positive right. No, okay, wait. First of all, gut checks all of these arguments. As in, if I defend something different in the 2NR, you would just not vote on it. Like, if it is clear in the 1NC that I defend the quo, or just not the app, and then I can't shift, obviously. Okay, now my interpretation. Their arguments. They say that they offered in cross-examination to change it, but changing the advocacy text just means jettisoning the 1AC. Also, the 1AC already happened when you offered it, which means the prep time from the 6 minutes would effectively go away. Also, offering in cross-examination to change it, the only thing you offered to do was defend enforcement, but we say that that is bad, because if you fiat enforcement, that means you get 1AC solvency in it, and we don't have the ability to contest it. Even if you did change it at that moment, it wouldn't change the fact that we still had no ground, because the legislation already exists. You're just enforcing existing legislation. You say it's key to create inherency, but your app is not inherent. You say banning redlining is the only topical interpretation of the app, but we say that you should ban redlining and do more. This is the third standard. It solves 100% of your offense. If you ban redlining and then guarantee the right to housing, it necessarily means that you allow for an increase in public housing, which allows us to get offense to Section 8 just had to the right to housing bad arguments, i.e. the card we read on case that said right to housing leads to patriarchy. That would link to the affirmative, but it doesn't link to this app, because all they do is they ban discrimination, but they don't establish a right. They ban something that violates right, but they don't establish it. They say they would tell local judicials they will be fine if they did it. This is an advocacy shift proves abuse. Also means that you should lean heavily. You should lean towards our original shell that was read in the 1 and C, as opposed to their arguments. If there's any kind of sort of evidence that they have done the same thing, they say it means that I get disads. But this proves that they shift. Or the example they give how they tell local judicials they will be fine if they did it is a shift from the status quo. In cross-examination, it was clear that they defended the status quo, which necessarily means that it's a sketchy argument. You say or they say that giving piece of bread increases right to housing too. I'm not a criticism of positive rights, I'm a criticism of effects T, and positive and negative rights might both be effects T, but that just means that both of them are wrong. Our interpretation solves the offense, and the counter-interpretation has no negative offense, and the competing interpretation necessarily means we win. Time T is not an argument because we're clearly winning the show.
So order is going to be the second shell.
Your second shell?
Yeah, my second shell. I guess we'll extend the weighing I made at the end of my speech. When I reupload that. And so yeah, we'll start with that. And then we'll get to the second shell, and then probably the teacher.
Cool. What you said the weighing where?
So you probably flowed this on their T shell. The weighing, like why 1 or 3 comes first.
Oh, okay.
At the very end of the 1 round.
Yes.
So everyone good?
They don't attempt to do anything between the two shells. They just say that I kill all the ground. However, they can see that my shells are prerequisite because of 7 and 13 times. Means that if they were ahead of their shells, only because I didn't have enough time to cover, which means that evaluating my theory shells are a prerequisite to actually being able to evaluate whether he's winning his T shell. That takes out all of his arguments. At the very holding to some burden of his order, he just concedes this in his last speech, which means that if I went any offense back to the second shell, that means you automatically vote for me. They just say that I proved the abuse because I chose not to engage. No, I chose not to engage in substance because you conceded RBIs, which there's no world in which this debate goes down to substance. Let's go to the second interpretation. Extend the interpretation that the negative debater must have an explicit protection. The 1 and 2 they consider violate. The problem here is that they just don't have offense here. They just say CX check to be first one. That's there's still not disadvantage to CX. There's still not disadvantage to CX. For example, I can forget to ask, and that means that you get access to your shiftiness and things like that, which means it's still disadvantageous. The second point is that CX does not check abuse because that means I can't prep during your 1 and 2, which means that it still skews my ability to prep your offense. At the very least, you should be very skeptical of this argument. They don't even articulate why CX checks. Why CX checks? They just say that CX checks. Well, it solves your abuse. Now they also say that now let's go to the line valley. They say that they wouldn't know what to defend if the asked on here. That's exactly the abuse on this argument because that means that if you don't know it, that means I don't even know what you defend. At the very least, you try to defend something that is not the app. You can say you defend a world in which we don't enforce bans and redlining or something like that. The point is I don't even know whether I can leverage offense against this. Also, the app is inherent. I say that we enforce that we enforce the bans on redlining. You might think that's theoretically objectionable. However, that just means that you should win that shell first. But obviously, this comes at a higher level, so it is inherent. So it means I still have access inherent to that. And through that aspect, they also say that I just shifted my advocacy. First point is that no, I specified my advocacy, something that you didn't ask there. There's a difference between shifting and specifying an advocacy. If you do not ask about how we enforce something, then I specify that, then obviously that is a different issue, especially if I'm answering a specific theoretical objection such as a multi-actor fiat, whereas they can just get up in the activation and go, oh, I defend a world in which we ban housing discrimination, something like that. The problem is that at the very least, compared to the worst, so at least you have some actives to hold you to, or as you don't even know what they defend, which means you can only get access. They also say that judge should check the abuse. The point is that the judge doesn't even know what you defend. There's no way you can check the abuse if they don't know what they defend in the first place. They just say hold because they start from the premise that they have a stable advocacy and the judge will hold me to that. However, the judge, if you don't even know what their stable advocacy is in the first place, you may think, which means that they don't have access to any of their offense. So, like, to be very simple, you may think like the shell's like very frivolous or something like that, but they just don't have offense on this, right? So it means that, and they have conceded weird reasons why 1 or 3 outweighs. Now let's go to their shell. First problem is that I'm still going to be winning on their shell. They've conceded the argument that I still multi-actor fiat because the USFG finds actors finds local like judiciaries who don't enforce the ban, which means that creates an inherency. Also sells multi-actor fiat, which means that it takes out all of their inherency argument. That was literally all of their arguments. That was literally the entirety of their one of their last speech. The last speech was not being inherent is bad because there's infinite things already in status quo. This is not in the status quo, which means it sells back your offense. Their second argument was just that their second argument was that they don't get access to dissets and things like that. However, obviously, it's a shift from the status quo. They can still get dissets, like i.e. it costs money or something like that, or it makes people mad. They can always get access to dissets, which means it solves back all of the, which means that literally solves back all their use. Also, which means that it's not beneficial, which means that they don't have any offense. Why they wouldn't solve.
Yeah, they're still in the setting. They're still deciding.
I guess. I don't know. Yeah, I'm in here. So, they were still deciding when I did.
Alright. Congratulations, everyone. For making it to the semifinals of the state tournament. It is a 2-1 decision for the negative.
In an impressive streak, I sat again. Simon, I think there are just some arguments in the 1AR that are just not being responded to. I think this argument that like the 1AR theory shells would come first, just not responded to. And I think that Richard is right that there at least is some reason that you have to respond to these things. They do have an implication that says that part of determining who did the better debating on theory requires that I give some credence to the arguments that happen this time, supposedly. So at that point, I go to this like second shell. I think that Richard is right that there is pretty much just defense here. I think the only argument that might not be defensive is this claim that you make that there's no way to determine what there's no way to determine how to write a negative advocacy for an app that where you are not sure what it is. One, I don't know that this argument is offensive. But two, I don't think it is ever implicated offensively for sure. I think that for you to make that argument, you would have to talk to some degree about how unfair it would be for you to have to stake a negative strategy on something that he's probably just going to stand up and say, "Joke's on you, that was the app." But I just don't think that argument is ever made. So it seems like there's only defense here. There's at least a risk that the negative would have the ability to shift. So it seems like I just went on that shift.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, absolutely.
So the first is, how did you evaluate accuracy, text being slow, judge that shift?
I don't think that argument is necessarily true, especially in the case where it was unclear after both cross-exes who or if anyone was defending the status quo. I think that you need to I think that ultimately that argument also just seems to be one of the arguments that I think is just defensive. It seems like it would be better for negatives to have an advocacy text. That was, I think, how I
The second question is, how did you evaluate the argument that Richard made too, where he read an advocacy text and then shifted out of it?
So one, I do think that there is a relevant distinction between specifying and shifting that is not really ever explored. I think it is probably not great the way that the 1AR specifies per se. Also because I just did not think that the 1AR articulation of what the app was the same as the AC. But I also don't understand why that argument necessarily means that. Why that argument is abusive in the same way, since it seems like his argument is that there's just no way for him to figure out how to respond to the negative. I don't think that I don't think the negative makes. I don't think the 2N makes the same argument there. You just sort of say, well, he did it too. I don't think there's an implication of that.
I think that is a perfectly reasonable way to view what I think was a good example of two people who I think are very good at debate performing very bad debate in front of me. And so I blame the 1AR for this decision because I think that the 1AR theory shells are a bit silly. But I think fundamentally, in the shell that you end up going for in the 2AR, Richard, does actually require that I evaluate whether or not plans that lack inherency are a good or bad thing. I don't know how to separate those two issues. I understand that on the affirmative that the preference towards arguments that have less time has been conceded. But this is a matter of technical debate that still has to make sense in my head, right? So to me, it makes sense, the argument makes sense for a lot of things, but not for this particular shell that you end up going for in the 2AR, that the negative must have an advocacy text. Because the entirety of the negative shell that has been run against you is how the negative would not be able to construct an advocacy text to begin with. So there is interaction going on that I just feel like is fundamentally ignored in the 2AR. On the negative, now the problem is probably one of signposting, right? Like the negative puts all of this debate on the tweet shell and doesn't do the best interactions with this specific shell either. And so I think that on that level, there is going to be confusion at the end of the round. But I do agree with the negative. I'm not really sure how the negative, you keep on saying the negative could have read a counterplan. But I'm not really sure what the counterplan would be because it's really unclear to me what the affirmative does, given that the affirmative exists in the status quo and is not solving. So I'm really not sure what the advocacy is of the affirmative, and so I'm not sure. So I think that it is less abusive to, in this particular instance, allow the negative to not have an advocacy text because I'm not sure how he would construct that advocacy text because it seems to be controlled by whether or not there was an advocacy that was able to be comprehended and clashed with to begin with, right?
Why does inherency affect, why does the app not being inherent determine whether the negative has an advocacy?
Well, because I think that the arguments are that the lack of inherency makes it impossible to construct an advocacy text.
But why? I make that
That's how I completely don't understand the argument. That's right. So the negative does not know how to adequately clash with the affirmative if the negative is not sure what the affirmative does or what the action of the affirmative is, right?
If it's just a slow.
Yeah, I still. Why does that mean that they can't have an advocacy, right? And that might be a question of the desirability of their advocacy compared to the app. But why does that mean they can't have their advocacy? Sorry, what?
I can finish my sentence now.
Oh, sorry, I thought you were done.
So my point here is that the entirety of this debate is over the fact that you have an existing law and you just say we're going to enforce. No explanation of what that means or how that is in any way going to result in the impacts that you claim. So I don't know how you can have a counter plan that says anything about that. It doesn't make sense to me.
Well, that's a reason why writing a counterplan might be hard. That's not a reason why you can't write a counterplan.
Yes.
Why?
It is certainly a reason why counterplays, why there would be no way to determine what counterplay would be able to be considered.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean that the neg just shouldn't have an advocacy, right?
It means there's no competitive counterplans, there's no decides that could possibly link. I think that.
The argument is pretty strong on
Not being able to win a counterplan debate seems like a pretty decent fairness argument. There's no way to determine what counterplan to compete with.
Yeah, maybe in my mind the argument about like the desirability or the ability of the counterplan to compete is distinct from like the negative having a stable advocacy text.
I mean, they would both
Define
like collapse in like terminate in an inability for the negative to coherently construct the strategy, right?
I just I understand what you're saying. I just think those two things are distinct.
So I'm just confused. It's like this last question, but like why is the app not being inherent mean that you can't have like a competitive competition? Can't it just be like we don't ban redlining? That would be, or don't endorse a ban for redlining, wouldn't that be a competitive in the world in which even if the app is inherent?
So there are a couple of issues here that we haven't even got to, but are things that the negative has said in this debate. So first of all, saying that something we've all come to a consensus is a bad idea, i.e. redlining, is the only acceptable ground for a negative to have to defend in this debate is ridiculous, right? If there are no existing disadvantages to doing that, because we've all already agreed that doing it was pretty disadvantageous to begin with, then why would we continue to, why would that be a good advocacy for him to have to
I'm not saying that. It's like, I don't,
Well,
maybe perhaps I didn't make this clear enough, but like the way I saw it is just that it's not a question about whether he has like good advocacy, it's just like what the advocacy is. Like, yes, it can be the case that like I shouldn't defend an app that bans redlining. That seems to be a separate theoretical issue from whether or not he can have it.
So there's never an answer, and I'll go back to this, and then I'll let Nolan go. But there's never an answer to the framing issue at the top of the NR that says that this is not just a debate about the specifics or extensions in the round, but this is a debate about what kind of debate round I want to see. I don't want to see a debate round where the negative functionally has no ground, even though they might have technically had a theory violation against them because they did not construct the ground in the way that you wanted. That makes less sense to me than a round which the negative proposes, in which both sides could have equal ground, and we could still have the kind of theory debate that you want to as well.
Okay, so I agree with Jen on a lot of places, and I think I can make it a little bit clear to you, like that question you're asking, why, like the interaction done between the two shells. But just to like frame some part of this decision, I end up thinking that I buy a recontextualization, so now I evaluate the app as like expecting a funding mechanism, or like a TAC or like a fine mechanism. I end up thinking that's not a shift. It's not like a significant shift from the SCO. I think that as long as we can assume that there's currently a ban on redlining, that there is an existing enforcement mechanism, all you do is change that, or at least in some way. I think that is functionally SCO. I think that at this point, I buy your 1AR theory comes first arguments. So I think that the other shell would have been sufficient. Like, if you had gone for the other shell, I think this argument would have applied. The reason I don't think it applies is because of the nature of Salmon's counterinterp, which makes it so that the non-inherent app the question of the non-inherent app, just like Jen said, has to be resolved before I evaluate your offense. And I go to your shell, and literally the only piece of offense that I have extended, like there's a ton of weighing like around like trying to pick out like what parts of the advocacy matter, but at the end of the day, the only standard extended is you say, I don't know what you have to defend. You have to defend something that isn't the app, which means that it's hard for me to leverage offense. So the offense that I'm weighing is your ability to leverage offense against an NC strat. And for some reason, there needs to be a direct advocacy text for that. And so I'm weighing that against the argument Salmon's making about why it does not make sense and why there's no such thing as a coherent strat against an app with no inherency. And so the reasons for that are, I have an argument that's conceded that says it's impossible to find a competitive counterplan. I buy that. I think that you also don't give any examples of disads, so even if there are disads, all you're saying is you can say that redlining is good or that we should revoke the ban on redlining. But I think that this argument, I think Salmon's claim that you can't make me defend redlining is not just like a red check claim. I think there's an argument there. I think it's that an argument about the fact that there's a communal consensus on the fact that redlining is probably bad, that we don't want to question that. I think there's a fairness claim here to be said that people who defend morally reprehensible arguments lose rounds, right? That's bad ground, on a fairness level, it's just bad ground. I think he's winning that the ground that you force him to defend is either non-existent or is like an insta-loss thing, you cannot win. So I think at this point, you do not give Salmon a way to meaningfully engage. And I think that justifies the fact that he does not have a text, because what would a text in this situation look like, right? What is an advocacy text? If you outline a counterplan, it's already not competitive. There's no, a disad, I think his argument is right, If there's no text, I think we can assume the status quo. But in this case, we can't even assume that because the app complicates things. So it becomes extremely, extremely, extremely unclear to me what Sovereign could possibly defend to meet this interp that is not redlining good. And I think he's winning that he should not have to defend redlining good. So at that point, I feel very comfortable pulling the trigger on the T-shell because I think there's a conceived abuse claim about the app.
All right, got y'all. Awkward silence of